Ahoy friends, welcome to Small Boat Adventures. I'm Dan, and this is going to be a discussion of the sailing dory Udforskaven, which is a Centennial replica. I built this dory in my shop back in 2016, and I've been able to get some good sales in it since then. The original boat is in the Gloucester Historical Society, or the hull of it anyway. It's a famous sailing dory which was sailed by Gloucester resident, immigrant to Gloucester, Alfred Johnson, who came from Denmark in the 1870s and settled at Gloucester and was sailing as a fisherman out of that town. To celebrate the 100-year anniversary of the country, he sailed this boat, Centennial, which he had built in Gloucester, across the Atlantic Ocean. The boat that I built in 2016 is based directly on Centennial's lines as taken off by John Gardner at Gloucester in the 1970s. He included that line set in his book, Wooden Boats to Build and Use. In Chapter 6, page 53, 19th century working dory, John Gardner writes of Centennial, "Do old boats dream dreams, pulled out on dry land, snugly tucked away on shore? Do their decrepit timbers still shiver faintly, remembering old blasts? The sickening pitch of mountainous seas, the gale's maniacal scream? Who knows? But ghostly memories do emanate from their ancient bones, with power to beguile the viewer. And, coming into the presence of this matriarch of dories, the visitor is moved. She is the Centennial." In building my replica of Centennial, I wanted to stay true to the sort of spirit of the boat, but I also wanted to make it a little bit more user-friendly for coastal cruising and just sort of everyday use. The original Centennial is a almost scarily sparse vessel. She has two waterproof bulkheads, one at the bow, one at the stern, which limit access to those spaces. But in the event of a capsize at sea, would keep the boat from flooding. Now I have a bulkhead in Centennial as well in my boat, but I have hatch openings to access those bulkheads. So yeah, that's one of the big differences from my design to the original, from the boat I built to the original. When I sail my boat, I do sail it with the hatches closed, typically, especially the bow and stern hatches. The stern is the area which has a bulkhead between that and the main hull. I usually do have there's a small center access hatch that it gives me access to the below decks, sort of in the sleeping and stowage area. It's a access hatch through the main hatch that I built. So you'll notice in many of my videos when I'm sailing, you can see down in the at the bottom of the screen, the hatch cover, the small hatch that goes into the below decks is open. So I'll often sail with that open so that I can access, I can get down below and get my phone or charge my phone, or get to the radio, which is usually down there. I usually don't keep the radio in the footwell, standing well. Yeah, so that's another thing that I did with this boat versus the original Centennial. Original Centennial has a full depth standing well, so basically it's the bottom of the dory, and then there's a bulkhead forward, a bulkhead aft, and then there's some paneling along the sides of the standing well. And that was kept dry with a bilge pump. My build has a footwell that is just about the height of the water line of the dory. And I have plans to install cockpit drains, footwell drain in there, so that the footwell will be self-bailing. As you can imagine, just coastal cruising, as I've done so far, I've never been in a situation where I was getting significant amounts of water into the footwell. So I have yet to install that drain, and it hasn't been an issue at all. But yeah, so the other major difference between this boat and the original Centennial is the centerboard, which you can also see in this video, just behind the tabernacle of the mast. And that centerboard, you can see, comes out through the deck, so I can adjust the centerboard without going below if I have to. And there is no opening below decks of the centerboard except for a small access hole which has a bung in it. And that bung keeps any water out of the boat from slopping through that access hole. And it actually also keeps a lot of moisture that would just sort of move with the air up through any opening that was below decks. And when you're pulled up on the marsh for the night or whatever, and sleeping below, if you pull the bung out, you'll definitely get a strong whiff of marsh grass and mud up through that hole. So it's nice to have the living area completely closed off from the centerboard trunk. So one of the great things about Centennial is that she is a very seaworthy small craft. This is the Gloucester Schooner Races 2019, and you can see I'm right out there aboard Centennial with all the big boys, the big schooners. So yeah, it's nice to have a small boat that you can be pretty confident will take care of you in just about any sort of conditions that you come across, cruising, coastal cruising. And of course, prudent seamanship, checking the weather and planning the weather is always important. But yeah, Centennial can pretty much handle whatever you throw at her as long as you don't end up getting blown up onto a shore or something. But yeah, she's a very dry boat as well. Like this, you can be out in just about any sort of reasonable chop, and you won't get any water on deck. This day here was just a nice, probably 15-mile-an-hour breeze. Never even came close to getting any spray or water on deck, or very dry boat as far as spray as well. Some boats will, they won't take a lot of water on, but they'll throw spray all over you, and this boat just does not do that. A big part of that, I believe, is the fact that she's an older design, and a dry boat was essential, 100 years ago when people didn't have the wetsuits and dry suits that today's sailors usually need to sail. A lot of the boats that are fairly common today, especially small boats. Another nice thing about this boat is that tabernacled mast I was talking about, which really makes this boat usable as a trailer boat, because if you had to take the mast out and completely unrig or de-rig everything, including the stays, it would just be a nightmare to get everything set up at a launching ramp or whatever. With the Tabernacle mast, I have the ability to slack the forestay and lower the entire rig back onto the boat, secure it with a couple tie downs, and then I'm ready to travel. So in this case, I actually sailed from Newbury over to Gloucester, but the next year I just trailered over to Gloucester and launched in the harbor, and was actually 2 years later because of COVID. But anyway, launched in the harbor and was ready to go. So yeah, that Tabernacle mast, which is only 16 feet, so it's very easy to raise with one person. And like I say, the shrouds, the side stays, remain attached. So you just tension the forestay with I've got a 3-to-1 little block pulley there. Tension that forestay, and the rig is essentially up. You're pretty much ready to raise sail. Yeah, so the seaworthiness of the boat is great. Now on my boat, I do not have a auxiliary power. I don't have a motor of any sort. So a big part of sailing this boat is checking the tides. As long as you have either the wind or the tide with you, you can pretty much get where you want to go. But if you're out in the ocean or whatever, and it's getting towards dark and you don't have the tide with you and the wind starts dying, you may find yourself anchoring at a river mouth, or just bobbing offshore for the evening. Thankfully that hasn't happened to me, bobbing offshore, but I have anchored at the mouth of the Ipswich River once when the when the wind just died on me and the outgoing tide was, I probably could have tried rowing against it, and I did row against it to some degree, to get up in the river mouth, but it's this boat can be a bit much to row against any sort of a strong tide, so you really need to keep that in mind. I mean, if you were thinking about rigging up your own boat, you could always plan on auxiliary, put either an electric or a small gas motor in it, and take care of that that part of the sailing. But I just I've really enjoyed sailing it without propulsion, and I seem to have done pretty well so far. Here's Centennial offshore, and this is where this small boat really excels. You can see I've got all three sails up, the main, the jumbo, and the flying jib. I've got the flying jib as far up the mast as it'll go to catch as much wind as possible. This is a fairly light wind day, probably blowing a steady 12 or so, 12 knots, and I'm headed back from Isle of Shoals. Ended up going back up into the Merrimack River. So yeah, this is really, she's just really performing here. Just perfect weather. I'm about as close hauled, close to the wind as I can get, and have the flying jib fill. If I wanted to get any closer to the wind, I'd probably take that flying jib down. But yeah, she's just chugging along, very comfortable, and I've actually got the tiller lashed at this point. I have a safety line tied around me in the event that I should go over the side, which would be a very dangerous situation. But I'm sailing from inside that hatch cover. You can see I'm standing down inside the hatch. I'm not actually even in the footwell. Oh, it looks like I'm sitting on deck between the hatch and the footwell. But oftentimes I'll actually stand right down inside the hatch, so I'll be waist deep in the boat. Yeah, let me see if I can. So here you can see how the helm is lashed. I'm not steering the boat with the tiller. I'm just I've trimmed the sails, including that flying jib, and using the centerboard as well to balance the boat. So she's sailing along happily on this course headed for the Merrimack River. And I can make any fine adjustments to course that I want by allowing the boat to heel a bit more, or flattening the boat out. If I bring the boat more vertical, flatten her out, then she'll bear off the wind slightly. And if I allow the boat to heel to the wind, then she'll round up and point a little bit more to windward. So those are sort of fine adjustments that I can make just by shifting my weight, but otherwise, the boat will sail happily along on whatever course I've adjusted the sails and the rudder and the centerboard to sail. And this is undoubtedly an important aspect of the boat the original boat, when Alfred Johnson was sailing across the Atlantic Ocean from Gloucester to Liverpool, England. The boat had to be able to sail itself for long periods of time and not tire out Johnson during the crossing. The other sail that Johnson had during his Atlantic crossing, which I do not have on my boat, is a square sail, which would allow Centennial to sail directly downwind and self-steer downwind as well, which my boat will not do. The mainsail, when it's out far to one side, you can only point so deep downwind. You can only get the bow to go so far downwind, and then the mainsail begins blanketing the jibs, and the mainsail out to one side will overpower the flying jib even, which is out on the bowsprit, which does help with downwind work. So Johnson, with that square sail, he would have been able to point Centennial, his boat, directly downwind. So I don't have that on Udforskaven. Incidentally, the name Udforskaven is a Danish phrase that I got from a book which was given to me by the great-great-granddaughter of Alfred Centennial Johnson. And the book is a book by Robert Morris. It's called Across the Atlantic Alone, the story of Alfred Centennial Johnson. And so in that book there was the phrase Udforskaven, which loosely translated from the Danish means oceans to explore. Yeah, so this is some good footage. I'll bring up some more sailing footage. This is, like I say, about I'm probably 5 miles offshore. You can see the coast of Massachusetts and New Hampshire in this video. New Hampshire's off to the right, and if I turn the camera around again towards the stern, you'll even be able to see some of Maine. Dead ahead is the entrance to the Merrimack River, and then off to the left, just barely visible, is the shore of Ipswich, Essex, and then Cape Ann beyond that. I can probably see Gloucester at this point, but you can't see it on the camera. Yeah, so now for something totally different. Here's some rowing footage of rowing up the Parker River. For an overnight up above the train tracks, and then a trip up Little River to the falls, which I actually didn't make it up that far this trip, but this was March 2020, so it was probably like 30-35 degrees this evening, and yeah, I definitely had the stove going. There was a small wood stove below decks which I built, and yeah, just a incredibly quiet evening on the river, and just a really beautiful trip. This is the next day up Little River, and so you can see, I'm right up in the marshes there, and that's, one of the other interesting things about Udforskaven, about Centennial, is it's a design that allows you to really kind of do a little bit of everything and do it tolerably well. It's not a performance day sailor. It's not a boat that you'd want to go offshore for long passages in. At least, if you're someone who values comfort or whatever, it's definitely possible. But it can do a little bit of everything, which is just a real joy of this design. And the flat bottom, I can slide through 12 inches of water, maybe 14, with the rudder down, over sandbars or whatever. And then here I am up in Mill River on this boat, and just enjoying a early season trip up the salt marshes. And like I was saying, it is a trailerable boat. Launches and retrieves quite easily with even with one person. Two people, it's a breeze. But I, launch and retrieve regularly with just myself. I've got a couple guides on the trailer to kind of keep the boat centered. Yeah, so here's some more shoal water sailing. This is up the Essex River, up in the little bay behind Cranes and Steep Hill Beach, up around Hog Island and Canomo Point. Just a gorgeous part of the world. And you can see in this shot we're probably in 3 feet of water or so, and just exploring these tidal marshes around Chode Island and Hog Island. And I've done a number of really enjoyable trips locally with Udforskaven. Like I was saying, up Mill River. The earlier footage with the tiller lashed was, as I said, on the way back from Isle of Shoals. I've been out to Isle of Shoals with the Dory 3 times now. Once from the Ipswich River. I actually launched at the Parker, sailed down to Great Neck in Ipswich, spent the night there, and then headed over to Gloucester for the schooner races. Then left from Gloucester, went to Rockport for the night, and then left the next day from Rockport for Isle of Shoals, and then sailed back from Isle of Shoals to the Merrimack River. That was probably the longest trip that I've done. Continuous, just sailing Centennial. Then this trip here is a trip that I did from the Parker River over to Essex and back. This was earlier in the year. This was in May, late May, and it was just a gorgeous trip. You can see how green everything is, and it was before the bugs came out, which is why it was so beautiful up behind. You can see in the distance here the Cranes Beach. You can see the sand dunes if the camera pans off to the right. And then ahead of us is the sort of pasture land and farm fields of Hog Island, and then surrounded by salt meadow. So this was a week-long trip. I hauled out. I anchored the boat off of the shipbuilding museum up in Essex, and left the boat up there for the week, and then sailed back the next weekend. The other thing you can notice on this video is I've used a lot of sort of natural hemp line, the main sheet there, and the pulleys and blocks on this boat are all galvanized iron, cast iron blocks and pulleys, except for the main sheet block that's on the Traveler, on the hawse, at the transom, which is a wooden block with a cast iron frame, and that wood just keeps it from banging up the deck too badly. If I had a cast iron pulley back there, she'd be knocking against the deck when the boom came across. So yeah, just sort of idyllic conditions. No waves up in here, just a little bit of wind chop if the wind picks up. But this was just a gorgeous day for day sailing. And like I said, I ended up spending the night over right behind Crane's Beach, where you could hear the surf and the seabirds calling in the morning. Just a great way to wake up. This is New Year's Eve aboard. I believe it's 2019. This was a trip that I did. I just put the boat in the water and made a couple short day sails. And this was a overnight I did that was just off a little launch area at the end of an access road, so it's easy to get back and forth. But this was, I believe, New Year's Eve, and it was a bit of a little northeaster coming through. Rain, sleet, a little bit of snow. It was in the low 30s all evening, and so you can see I've got the boat pulled up on the marsh there. I've got I now have a little hobo stove top, a little shanty top that keeps the rain out of the stovepipe. But at that point, I just had an elbow up there to keep most of the rain out. The stove is bolted up out of cast iron pipe, and you can see the temperature inside is 55 and climbing. I got it up to 65, close to 70 by the end of the evening. And that little stove just chugs along, and the cast iron radiates an excellent heat. Sometimes you want to pull your feet away from it. It gets so warm down there. But it will burn either charcoal or wood, a little hardwood. Cut it to 8-inch lengths or so, 6-inch lengths, and drop it in there. And yeah, it just burns it up, and then at the end of the evening you can close that door, and there's 2 little holes. It's just enough draft to allow the wood to pretty much burn itself up entirely to ash, and let the stove coast for, say, an hour or so before it ends up burning out. And so this is below decks, and you can see the bunk area here. I still need to get the bedroll spread out, but you can see it's very tight. If you're a claustrophobic person, it's going to be an issue, but it's just barely sitting headroom below decks, below the hatch cover there, the cargo hatch cover. And yeah, really, once you're in that bed, it's nice and warm. And I usually, I've got a blanket over there's 2 inches of foam there, foam padding, and those the bed sets up on these slats, which slide in between. You can see the 2 seat risers there, so the slats go in between the risers and then slot into a rail on the centerboard box. Oh, and that was the other thing. The centerboard box is L-shaped, unlike the original Centennial, which was a rectangular box, the full height of the below decks. So it basically bisected the below deck area into 2 narrow sections, whereas this L-shaped box, it separates the separates the below deck forward up near the mast, but it allows use of either side of the centerboard box. So that's, I think, a good sort of compromise for this for Udforsk Gavin, because it makes her more usable as a small, day sailor, overnighter, dinghy cruiser type boat. So yeah, there's a close shot of the stove. You can see how it's two sections of cast iron with a band at the joint, and then those verticals tie the stove together and keep it secured to its mounting bracket. There you can see I put some fresh wood in, and the stove's starting to fire up again. And here's a good shot of the aft end of the centerboard box is L-shaped, like I was saying, and the centerboard itself is L-shaped, and it comes up through the deck outside of the below deck, so there's no access to the centerboard box except for this hole. You can access the end of the box. You can put a rod down there if you need to push the board down for some reason, and that little plug is what keeps the marsh gas out. So it's nice to have that secure in there, because with that out you can definitely smell the marsh. So here's Centennial in her element. This is a trip 2020 from Ipswich to Gloucester, out and around Cape Ann, and this is the afternoon, headed west along the south shore of Cape Ann. You can see Eastern Point is under the sail ahead, and then after Eastern Point is the breakwater and the turn into Gloucester Harbor. So this is just a gorgeous day, a glorious day at sea. Nice breeze blowing 12 to 15. I got the jib and main up and sheeted in pretty tight. You can point a little bit higher than this, but she's pinched pretty good, and you want to keep this boat moving. You don't want to get it so tight to the wind that you start sliding sideways and losing headway. So we got all the sheets, got everything sheeted in fairly tight, and we're working our way upwind against this afternoon chop that's blowing in from along the south shore, blowing in from Boston. And just a real beautiful day on the water. And you can see the forward hatch there is lashed down to keep that secure in the event of rough water or some sort of heaven forbid, capsize or whatever, limit the egress of water into the boat. Hanked on jib. Now the flying jib is set flying. There is no stay out there, but you can see the line that runs out to the end of the bowsprit. And so I usually keep the flying jib stashed down in that front hatch in the bow, in the forecastle. And if I've got a passage to make that makes it worth setting that jib, I'll haul it out and clip it onto the line you see, and then there's another line which is the uphaul for the jib. I'll clip it on there, and I'll run the jib out on the bowsprit, and then I'll turn up into the wind, and while it's luffing, I'll haul the jib up to the top of the mast, and then head off again quickly, and the sail fills and off you go. But there you can see the wooden block that the main sheet runs through. And then I'll usually, I'm not sure if I'm doing it here, I'll usually run the main sheet. It goes from the end of the boom through that wooden block on the Traveler up to the boom again to another pulley. And then I'll usually run that main sheet down to a cleat on the leeward side. I've got two big locust cleats on either side of the standing well. So I'll run that line down to the leeward cleat and just loop it under it. I won't actually cleat the main sheet off. And then up to my hand. And that provides more downforce directly in line with the sail and the boom, sort of on the leeward side. Kind of functions as another traveler, pulling the mainsail flatter for going upwind. And yeah, you can see we're just working to weather. She's just chugging along, slicing through the chop there. This is about as far as she goes over when sailing. I have yet to put the rail under when I'm sailing the boat. It really firms up when the rail gets down to within, say, 6 inches or 4 inches of the water. And yeah, I'm sure you could put the rail under, if you did something, if you sheeted in and pulled in hard off and got it side to the wind or whatever. But just in normal sailing, I have yet to put that rail under. And the other thing with this boat is it's small enough where the sailor's body weight, especially if you're got a little bit of weight to you, like I'm up just above 200, so the sailor's body weight can really be used to good effect to generate power going to windward. I don't usually hike out a lot on this boat, but you can. If you needed some power, you really needed to stand up to the wind, you could get your weight to windward. And her bottom is only 38 inches wide, so it's a fairly narrow hull. But like I say, when it gets over there and that rail hits the water, and then she's got about 800 pounds of iron ballast in her bilge. So that really firms the boat up a lot. And if you do hike out, then you can generate quite a bit of power going to windward. And so, like I said, she's 38 inches on the bottom and 6 feet at the rail. So you've got a fairly efficient lever arm there when you get some weight to windward. And yeah, here we are. We're just chugging along. I'm not stressing out at this point. Just taking it easy, sailing to windward, headed for Gloucester. And like I say, this is really what Centennial loves. So yeah, if you've got any questions, comments, thoughts, likes, subscribes, or whatever, feel free to leave them below. And thanks so much for tuning in, and yeah, massive thank you to everyone who's supported the channel. We couldn't do this without your help and encouragement. So yeah, thanks for stopping by Sailing Centennial, Small Boat Adventures, and we'll see you next video. Have a great day. Bye.